돈 처음에 이 소주 정도에 아까 뭐 나라 준비했고 남이요 이나 대답이 나는 다들 가다고 있나 뭐 해요 아니 나는 마음에 들어서 때문에 너나 하나는 되나 아니 그거나 아니 그 토벌 그게 뭐 옛날에는 나만 얘기를 듣게와나 아때가 그거 탑산이고 말이야 그다도 탑을 그동안 권하는 그래서
In this life we can flee from armies and enemies. But what will you do if you were born in the Asura, Demigod realm, says Chagme. If in this lifetime, in this particular circumstance in which we find ourselves, we should be pursued by armies, by police, by people who pursue us for whatever reason, by all means it would be possible, if we were skillful enough, to somehow get ourselves out of this fix, somehow find a place to flee from these people, somehow find a place to hide from these people so that they cannot capture us. That would work in this life. But if we were born in the realm of the Asuras, or demigods as they're called, or literally non-gods, there would not be a single spot anywhere in that realm where we could possibly hide ourselves. There's not the tiniest spot anywhere in this realm which is not characterized by strife, by fighting, etc., and so forth. So that would be the situation in such a realm, no way to hide in any way whatsoever, in any which way whatsoever. What would we do in such a situation? The realm of the Asuras, or demigods as they're also called, for the most part comes together through the influence of the emotional defilement with jealousy. And it is said that the realm of the Asuras is situated on the northeastern side at the very bottom of Mount Meru in the oceans which surround the lower part of the central mountain. If we remind ourselves of this classical cosmological worldview, there is this central mountain called Meru, half of which is situated below the waters, the other half rises up above the waters. So on the northeastern side, in these waters, in these oceans, the realm of the world of the Asuras is situated. And then above the Mount Meru, there we find the various realms of the various types of gods. Now it is the case in this worldview that out of this world of the Asuras grows a huge tree which has its roots in their world, yet it grows up alongside the northeastern side of Mount Meru, and it comes to bloom right within the god realms. Its branches are abundantly laden with all sorts of fruits, with all sorts of possibly imaginable good things, whatever you could possibly wish for, be they wealth, be they all sorts of clothing, food, fruits, whatever it might be, this tree provides it all. The problem with this tree is that even though it it has its roots in the Demigod realm, the Asura realm, it is actually the gods who enjoy all the fruits of this tree. This is what makes these demigods really jealous, because after all, the tree grows out of their realm now, doesn't it? So this is cause for their constant strife and their constant fight against jealousy, that they just cannot get over the fact that though this tree grows out of their realm, it is altogether other folks who enjoy its fruit. No, the Asuras or demigods, not at all amused about this state of affairs, can just not get over the fact that it is not them who enjoy the fruits of this tree. So they constantly muster their armies. They rise out of the seas, they send their armies, equipped with all sorts of weaponry, up the mountain, up this Mount Meru, in order to wage war on the gods. The gods themselves, led by the king of all the gods of the desire, Indra, however, retaliate, of course. So Indra sends his armies down in turn to fight off these demigods who are out to wage war on them. And so there constantly is a huge army of gods who shoot down in turn their own weapons, arrows and spears, whatever weaponry one could possibly imagine, down upon the ascending demigods. As these demigods are being completely devastated by these weapons, their bodies fall down into the oceans, pierced by arrows, by swords, by spears, etc., and so forth. However, their habitual tendency to be reborn in such a realm is not exhausted with this. They rather more are reborn immediately again in such a form, only to join the fight again right away. In this way, they constantly suffer through strife, through fighting, etc. Chagme continues to say, if seated at the end of the rope, we already become irritated. How much more irritating must be the suffering of falling from the heavens? How much harder to endure must be the suffering of falling from the heavens, or falling from the God existence? This may indeed occasionally happen to us. We come together for some sort of gathering, and at least, of course, we deem ourselves to be among equals. And for whatever reason, it may then happen that instead of being seated right at the very front of the action, we're being told to be seated somewhere at the very end. And that really upsets us now, doesn't it? I mean, all of these people who are our equals, they all get to sit right up front, right next to the stage. Good view. Just us, we're being told to sit over there on the back. No one really sees us, nobody takes any note of us, and we're also not getting any good view of the proceedings. So that really upsets us. We're feeling somewhat embarrassed about it, and then eventually we're feeling greatly angered about it. So this is the sorry state of affairs that we could possibly find ourselves in. Now, in the course of such gatherings, it can of course also happen that other sorts of people appear, not even invited, who immediately grasp the situation, immediately figure out where are the superior seats and where are the lesser ones, and since no one in particular has told them where to go and sit, they choose the best one right up front. However, since of course they have not been told to sit there, they somehow have to make their presence felt so that everybody would take note. Here I am, and then they look around themselves, they straighten up, and they make all kinds of thoughts like and like that. Respectful gesture, slightly bowing, they would ask, could I possibly serve you a snack, or could I serve you some drink? And then, instead of being rather overbearing as to the present moment such a person would have been, then they just kind of bow down and say, okay, if I have to. So as it is often the case with church gatherings, they come to an end. And then those on the lesser seats, of course, would stream out of the doors, out of the gates and be gone. But of course we have not as yet been seen by everybody. Being such a highly important person, of course we have to make sure that people take due note of us. And we would then slowly, heavy steps, broad shoulders, walk through the crowd, and occasionally make a very condescending remark to someone. You here as well? Nice to see you. Before we eventually are out of there as well. Then there are others, rather more modest, who are more often than not those who actually truly have some qualities, have knowledge, have some bearing within the community, and they are often just all by themselves to be found somewhere towards the back. When then spotted by whoever, the organizer of the event, or whoever it might be, and then asked, oh, please, wouldn't you come up to the front? We have a seat reserved for you. These people, for the most part, in a very modest way, would say, no, thank you very much. Perfectly fine here. Everything is good. Just get on. Now, if this is already the case in our present life, if we cannot even bear the imagined humiliation of not being put at the place that we consider to be our due, if we're being put somewhere at the end of the road and not being appreciated as we believe should be the case, if already that causes us distress and discomfort, maybe even suffering, then how much greater would we imagine the suffering to be to fall down from the God realms? Eventually, all gods doesn't go up any further within samsara will of course fall down from their God existence. And it is said that falling down from the God existence, leaving that existence behind, and then of course invariably being reborn in a somewhat lower realm, causes these gods unimaginable suffering. To be reborn anywhere among the 33 realms of the gods requires an accumulation of merit by far greater than the rebirth of the human realm necessitates. However, even though that is the case, even though these beings have accumulated so much more merit than we have, this comes coupled with extremely great pride and overbearing demeanor. So in this way, the influence of the emotional defilement of pride is also that much stronger in them. And this combination, for the most part, actually leads to rebirth in such God realms. Such gods, as it is said, live under unimaginable, nice, positive circumstances. They live in palaces which are made of precious substances, of jewels and all sorts of precious metals. They're decorated in the most unimaginably beautiful way, and they enjoy all sorts of wealth, all sorts of niceties. They are clad in the most beautiful silk brocade garments, which are utterly free of any stain, any dirt or strange smells, for that matter. They constantly come along smelling in the most beautiful ways of all sorts of perfumes, etc., and so forth. All of this has not been caused by their having brought these conditions together in any way, or having worked for them in that broad existence of theirs. It is simply caused by their having accumulated huge stocks of merit. Whatever pleasure we could possibly imagine in such a God realm, nothing whatsoever has to be done for it, no effort whatsoever has to be made. Things which simply appear before us, whatever it is that we might wish for, whatever delicious foods we could possibly think of. We don't have to go to the kitchen to prepare them, we just need to think of them. There they are. We're constantly surrounded by gods and goddesses which are clad into the most beautiful garments, which throw flowers all over the place, which sing and dance, which play all sorts of musical instruments. In this way, all our surroundings are just utterly enjoyable. There is not even the slightest cloud on the horizon. Everything is just swell. So we happily enjoy ourselves ever after for however long it takes, and it goes without saying that being busy with all that much enjoyment, of course the thought of concerning oneself with Dharma doesn't surface even once. We're way too busy enjoying than to think of Dharma. But then eventually, invariably, of course, the positive merits which have brought such a birth about in the first place will be exhausted. And when they're just about exhausted, all of a sudden such a God will hear a voice just out of thin air, out of space. A voice will tell that particular God or goddess, for that matter, your time is up. So, hardly have we heard that voice which told us clearly and unmistakably your time is up. All of a sudden, things seem to be so much different. During our long, seemingly endless God life, we've always been of the most beautiful appearance. Our body always smelled well, as if bathed in perfumes. The flower garlands that we were wearing were always fresh and beautiful to look at. The clothes that we were wearing were always clean and pristine, looking nice, smelling well. But all of a sudden, this changes drastically. If we look at ourselves, we find that all of a sudden we're heretofore, we have always been smelling very nicely. All of a sudden we're covered in sweat. We're smelling altogether disagreeable. And the flowers that we have been wearing heretofore all of a sudden start to rot, take on a rotten and old appearance. The clothes of ours all of a sudden seem to be dirty. There's no way to clean them in any which way. And all of these gods and goddesses which until only a couple of moments ago were there simply to entertain us with song and dance, all of a sudden seem to be very far away, seem to be unable to bear that miserable appearance of ours. What's more, they might even shout after us, apparently your time is up, but if you come around again, we'd be happy to receive you again, but for the time being, we just can't stand that miserable presence of yours. If all of this comes to pass, it becomes very clear to us that indeed time is up, that indeed we are about to leave this God existence of ours, that indeed we are about to die. All of a sudden, the thought of our own mortality strikes, and it strikes real hard. And this strikes unbearable fear into our hearts. Chagme continues to say, the sufferings of the three lower rungs of existence are unendurable. The happiness of gods and humans is impermanent and extremely perishable, changeable. Birth, aging, sickness, and death are like ripples of the water. The sufferings of samsara are indeed vast and deep. So as we have heard already, the sufferings of the lower existences, the hell realms, the hungry ghosts, the animals, needless to say, are utterly unspeakable. We wouldn't even care to think about them, so bad these sufferings are. But even the happiness in the human realm and in the demigod and the god realm, as we have heard about, even though there is a certain amount of happiness, a certain extent of happiness, more or less in the one or other realm, even these have no permanence unto themselves, and they're extremely changeable. And when changed, for the most part, what heretofore we have experienced as happiness, then immediately turns into suffering. So also there is no relying on whatever positive or happy or fortunate circumstance we might encounter. It may change any moment and change into something rather more disagreeable. Particularly in the human realm, we suffer predominantly of sufferings of birth, of old age, sickness, and death, which are likened to ripples on the water. And in this way, it is clear that the sufferings of all samsara, wherever in samsara we might find ourselves, as Chagme puts it, is vast and deep. verse continues saying, with many unending terrors. Well, it says that this ocean of samsara is full of unending terrors from which there is no escape whatsoever. Be afraid of this and avoid bad or unvirtuous actions as if they were poison. So wherever we might find ourselves in this vast and deep ocean of suffering that we call samsara, cycle of existence, we constantly undergo all sorts of unspeakable sufferings which for the most part we might not even want to imagine. There's no way around these sufferings. All of these different kinds of existence are characterized to a lesser or greater degree by suffering. Now, if we were to contemplate this thoroughly, this could indeed, by all means, strike true fear into our hearts, true terror, and make us wish to break out of this cycle of suffering. However, this cycle of suffering that we commonly know as samsara does not end by itself. There is no end point anywhere in sight which we could hope to somehow out of our own account to reach, so that all of a sudden, all by itself, suffering would come to an end. All this suffering is self-perpetuating in such a way that it actually arises out of our own mind streams. That which brings these suffering about in the first place are all the various passions, all the various emotional defilements, etc., on grasping onto things, are holding things to be real, whereas they truly are not, etc., and so forth. Therefore, if we would truly be afraid of such future suffering, if we would entertain the wish within ourselves to become free of such suffering, we would indeed be well advised to avoid non-virtuous actions which only accumulate further causes for further suffering. These non-virtuous actions of whatever type they might be are likened to poison here, which, needless to say, of course, we would avoid like the plague. On it goes saying, rely on that which can benefit you, the Dharma, which is, as if it were medicine. Just like a sick person would rely on medication in order to be healed of his or her sickness, we would indeed, or it would indeed serve us well to rely on the Dharma, to ingest, so to speak, Dharma regularly, to concern ourselves with Dharma regularly, learn and practice Dharma regularly, to such an intent that it would become, metaphorically speaking, the medicine which heals us from that disease, constantly recurring suffering. Swami continues to say, take as your protection the jewels who will guide you. The jewels here being none other but the three jewels, the three rare and precious ones, the Buddha is teaching the Dharma, the community of those who practice this teaching, the Sangha. So if we had understood all of these points to such an extent that we would now truly wish to place ourselves under someone's competent protection, then we would be best advised to place ourselves under the protection of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. As if in worldly matters we would put ourselves under the protection of a mighty ruler, king, or his ministers, and we would say to them, you have the power, you have the ability, protect me, I will follow your lead.
get out, don't have lots of work, and then Lord Johnson just send around the check about it. And then you don't know what send in somebody send in now young Tavande, that's very good.
All of these pieces of advice that we have heard until now should actually have taken care of whatever questions we might possibly have had on how to go about these matters. To reiterate, we would be well served indeed if in all situations and all circumstances we would constantly place ourselves under the protection of the three rare and precious ones, the three jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Constantly pray to them from the bottom of our hearts for guidance and simply follow their lead. While doing so, while placing ourselves under their protection, we would indeed be well advised to train ourselves in the various methods, such as the development process, meditation, mantra repetition of the various practices of the Elam deities, and so forth. And we should also train ourselves in the various methods and the various techniques of the perfection process meditation, such as shamatha, vipassana, shina, laughter meditation, as they're known in Tibetan. By all means, we should also train ourselves to the very best of our ability in the discipline of constantly giving rise to loving kindness and compassion for the sake of all beings. Train ourselves in that which is known as the enlightened attitude, or bodhicitta. There is not a situation in which we could not possibly train ourselves in this in one or another way. And taking all of this into account and reminding ourselves of the virtuous effect of all of these various techniques and possibilities that we could possibly apply, of course it goes without saying that while acting virtuously in such a way, we always accumulate positive merits. These are always to be dedicated for the sake of all sentient beings, not a single one excluded. So if we were to train ourselves in these ways, that would be all-inclusive. It would include every sort of practice, or every virtuous doing that we could possibly come up with, and then we could not go wrong. So therefore, reminding ourselves of these various points, of these various techniques, simply let us practice. We should dedicate the merit we have accumulated here for the sake of being.